So the ICE protests in Minnesota are still going on, and a few weeks ago we had mm, something bigger happening. Basically, there was a church, a city's church, where allegedly, it was believed that the pastor of the church, if I know this correctly, had some association with the ICE. Basically, either was part of ICE or was helping them or something among that regard. And that prompted a bunch of people, a bunch of protesters who were doing a protest, but at some point it wasn't a protest, or at least I wouldn't say so, because they basically invaded the church. They broke into the church where they weren't welcome. Well, that technically just walked in, well, but still weren't allowed to go in, and were refusing to leave again because of this, because they believed the pastor was involved with ICE. Among these protesters was also Don Lemon, a very known journalist who was live streaming the whole thing, talking to people, and yeah, generally being part of that whole group that came into the church. Because of this, three people were arrested on site itself, and I think where all of them were let go. But then later on, there were eight more arrests that came in, including, as we said, Don Lemon, who was arrested on January 29th, but was released without bail pretty much a day later. And there was also Georgia Ford, which I haven't heard anybody talking about. Apparently, it's also a journalist that was also arrested. She was arrested on January 30th. But Don Lemon is the one who is sort of getting the main publicity for this. Now, the main narratives are, of course, coming from the left. This is a violation of his free speech since he's a journalist. And sort of, I think, bad narratives from the right are coming. Don Lemon should get 40 years in jail for this, or in prison, rather, I should say. So, welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Daniel. Joining me today is James Valiant, a former prosecutor. So, we'll have a good discussion about this, about everything that is happening, about why he got arrested, and is this a violation of free speech? James, any opening thoughts from you? Also about the context, if I missed anything or if I got something incorrect.
No, a bunch of people stormed into a church in Minnesota because they thought the pastor was supportive of or working with ICE. That's basically the motivation as we're understanding it. But they stormed into a church and yelled, screamed, were very disruptive. I think people were injured in the course of the melee. Of course, all that needs to be fleshed out in court. But the video that was released makes it plain that there were people who were not there to pray or listen to a sermon or to sing hymns. They were there to disrupt and challenge, and they confronted the people there, including the pastor, about the situation going on in Minnesota. And so your reluctance to use the word protest is interesting there, because what do we mean by protest? Normally, we would include things that have nothing to do with one's protest. One can engage in a protest that violates rights and violates the law. I mean, the 60s protesters against Vietnam and the draft are called protesters, even if they violated the law. So when we use the word protest, we need to be very careful about what we mean here. There is, in that broad sense, no right to protest if it violates other people's rights. That's the thing. Whatever your position on immigration laws generally, whatever your position on what's going on in Minnesota, whatever your position on the shootings that ICE was involved in, or the shootings against ICE agents that have happened last year are, regardless of what your political view is, and I mean regardless of what your political view is, it does not matter how right, wrong, or obnoxious or correct your position is, that never gives you the right to violate someone else's rights. In fact, if you look at rights that way, as objectivists, we understand that rights form a logical unity. So just take a couple examples. Your freedom of religion, free religious exercise, does not give you the right to engage in human sacrifice. Or your freedom to move about the country and the right to travel, say, between California and Nevada, has been recognized as a right by the Supreme Court. You have a right to travel. Does that right to travel mean that I can trample on your land, trespass on your land, march over your land, No, it does not. Your rights end where someone else's rights begin, because rights form a logical unity. So whatever your position is, it's not free speech if you're violating someone else's rights. And I've heard some really disturbing arguments online where people are actually trying to use objectivism to justify first the assault on these poor people in the church, and secondly, Don Lemon's sort of freedom of the press. So let's take care of those issues too. Journalists have no rights different than anyone else. The Supreme Court has been clear about this as well. Journalists, their freedom of press is no different than anybody else's rights or freedom of speech. There's been special law. The only exception here are special laws that have been passed for journalists to be able to protect their sources for an article. So if they have confidential sources, we have statutes, and these statutes are limited, by the way, and they even then journalists can go to prison if they're in contempt of court in not releasing even their confidential sources if they don't come within the meaning of that very narrowly tailored law. But under the Constitution, the freedom of press does not grant any special rights to journalists. Is to get rid of that off the bat. Now, let's talk about the assault here of the crowd. It clearly violated a number of laws, good laws, correct laws that protect people's rights. So, for example, trespass. Let's start right there. There are many forms of trespass. Some people online said, well, it was open to the
Oh,
public.
maybe since we are going, we should say what the actual charges are. So the actual charges are conspiracy to interfere with religious freedom and interference with the First Amendment rights of worshippers. So
So far, the charges have been brought under what's called the FACE Act that was passed in 1994. That's the federal law that was violated here, according to the allegation. There's also an investigation going on. So far, they haven't filed charges, and I'm not sure they will, given Minnesota's political context. But there is an investigation, I understand, going on with state and local authorities for violations of state and local laws, which, in my view, plainly were violated here. The mere fact, though, that something is open to the public, and this is what I heard online, well, it was open to the public, so anyone could come in. No, that does not make it okay to do, nor does it take away from the trespass element. Local trespass laws were clearly violated. This was trespass. There's many kinds of trespass. If you come in and I ask you to leave and you refuse to leave private property, that's a trespass. Normally, though, an open field, say, I can walk across an open field if I don't do any damage. But if I fence the land and I put a no trespassing sign on that everyone can see, then of course if I jump the fence or get through somehow, that is a trespass. There's also trespass that injures the property. If I cut down a tree on your land, I'm again trespassing. Or let's take just a shoe store. The fact that a shoe store is open to the public does not mean you can come in and disrupt, start throwing things around, yell, disrupt the buying and selling of shoes, or people even just window shopping for shoes. A shoe store is open for a specific purpose. If you come in, even if it's open to the public, and interfere with the lawful business going on inside that place that's open to the public, you have trespassed, whether or not, and if someone asks you to leave, whether or not it is one of the other form of trespass. Just simply entering, this mob was not entering. What is a church open for? A church is open for people to come in and pray, listen to a sermon, hear a hymn or sing a hymn. These
yeah,
people
I
did
mean,
not.
we don't even have to go to like the extremes of what happened, right? If you go to like a library or a church, and even if you have loud conversation somewhere with somebody, you will most likely be asked to leave. And
You can
if
be
you
kicked
wouldn't,
out.
that would be trespassing.
You're interfering with what the function of the place. It was open to the public for a specific purpose. And if you interfere with people doing that, you are guilty of trespass. You're also clearly guilty, and this is the crowd going in. You're also clearly guilty of disorderly conduct or disturbing the peace. If you disrupt a lawful meeting, if you disrupt with loud noise, insults, interference, you're guilty of, in effect, a kind of disturbing the peace laws. So they're investigating on the state and local level, at least investigating on the state and local level violations of state and local law, which pretty clearly happened. Now, the FACE Act. In 1994, they wanted, because there was a very notorious shooting of an abortion doctor, and there were all these religious groups that were sort of interfering with women who were trying to enter abortion clinics. And so in order to protect abortion clinics and the women trying to get reproductive medical services, they passed this law. But in order to get it passed, they had to have bipartisan support. So part of this same law says that you cannot, not only can't you interfere with abortion clinics, you can't interfere with places of worship, churches, synagogues, mosques. That too is a violation of the same law. So it's a kind of civil rights act, although it's directed against individuals for violating other people's civil right to either obtain an abortion or to go to a place of worship. It's normally been used to protect abortion clinics, but recently it has been used. For example, last year there was a case the federal government filed, maybe a civil case, that the federal government filed to protect a synagogue where disruptive activity was happening, and we all know the increasing anti-Semitism. So under the FACE Act, passed in 1994, this, in my mind, is clearly also a violation of the FACE Act. You can see why the federal government might use the FACE Act in this case, because it was a giant crowd, children were crying, and there isn't a confidence that the state and local authorities will do anything about the trespass or disorderly conduct, which was also violated by this crowd. So I think there's, on the surface of it, if the videos at all are telling us the truth, there was a clear there was a conspiracy to do this. And, even a misdemeanor, if there's a conspiracy to commit a misdemeanor, that bootstraps it up to the felony level. So a conspiracy to commit any crime, if you and I have a conspiracy to commit a petty theft, that can be charged as a felony conspiracy. So conspiracy can up a misdemeanor to a felony. And in this case, we had a large crowd of people who clearly all arrived at the same place at the same time to do this. And so by implication, we can infer that there was a conspiracy to engage at the very least in trespass, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, that sort of thing, where there were victims, people who could not then do what the church is open to do, pray and listen to a sermon, right? Now we get to the question of Don Lemon and his role. As I say, journalists don't have any special rights over and above other people. So if he came in and was part of that disturbance, if he was entering there to interfere with the lawful business that the church was engaged in, then he too is as guilty of everyone else of the crime. Now, people say, oh, he was just a journalist, and so he has some kind of special right. Well, at the very least, I think we have some evidence that he was aiding and abetting and involved perhaps in the conspiracy. First of all, how did he know to be there at that time and place? But secondly, we've got video online now. It's clearly Don Lemon there at that church. He was handing out donuts and coffee. So he's actually providing material
By the way,
support.
just quickly for this, because I've seen that, but I've seen that like outside, somewhere outside, like posted weeks ago. So unless that is
Yeah,
like
if
a
the
different...
conspiracy happens 10 miles away, if he was
Sure,
providing
okay,
the
so
donuts and coffee
he would
10
be like,
miles away,
sure.
it would not affect his aiding and abetting of the crime. If I give you,
So he would be part of the conspiracy, therefore.
he would not only be part of the conspiracy, he would be aiding and abetting in the crime. So even if I give you, let's say I give you the murder weapon in another city, does the fact that I gave you the murder weapon take away from the fact that I was aiding and abetting in the murder? No. Doesn't matter where it happened. It matters his intent in giving out the donuts and coffee. And he was saying we to the people who would storm the place. He knew exactly, if this evidence is correct, again, it should be just decided in court, obviously. But if what the video appears to show is that he's talking to the people who are about to do this disruption in the church and talking to them in we terms and handing out donuts and coffee.
Sure. And since we are still, Robert has a question, and I can maybe put it into perspective. He says, well, first we have super chats from Bonnie and Jonathan. Thank you so much. Robert says, how on earth can handing out donuts and coffee be a problem? I think the right there gives license to whatever else the guy's doing. And I'm wondering if specific...
You're absolutely wrong there, Robert.
Because I want to put it into context. I'm wondering if it matters his knowledge of what might happen. Because let's say he didn't know this was going to happen, that they would like do this, and in his mind he was just giving donuts to like actual
Handing it
protesters.
just he would have been handing out donuts. Okay, that is absurdly naive. It is. In other words, I could if
No,
this
but
video
that goes to the mind. That goes to the mind of it, right? Like I could
right.
have done that, and if they would do it, like
He
they
just
might.
happened to be there handing out donuts and coffee to those people. No, he
No,
was
but
giving.
that might like he might have not known that they would do this. That's the thing, right?
Okay, that is preposterous on the face of it. He was there in order. He knew to be there at that time with those people. He knew what they were going to do. They were
But
planning to
you're
do.
you're saying that he
I
knew
am saying that it's an obvious inference
from what?
from the fact that an angry mob was gathering to storm this church. Okay, and why are you there? They weren't there to pray. They weren't. That's the only legitimate reason to go into that church. If there was a group of people who were going to confront the pastor, and he knew that, why was he there? He was to cover some incident that he knew would be there as a journalist. As a journalist, any material support, in fact, any agreement to help them do this, is part of the conspiracy and is providing material. Any material assistance to the commission of a crime is to aid and abet that crime. If you know what they're doing and you help them do it and you enter with them, you are actually participating in the crime. He did not go in there in order to say, stop from doing this crime. He's going in there to encourage, in effect, this demonstration. And in fact, the statements he made on his podcast afterwards indicated he knew that there was something. I don't approve of their kind of Christianity, but what they was doing, and I was just a journalist there to cover it. Now, how did you even know to be there to cover it? But no, he was actively supporting it. He was cheering them on to go in there. Like I say, how did he even know to be at that place at that time if he did not know what they were up to and what they were going to do? So I think it would be the height of dropping all mental contact. Let me put it this way: as a prosecutor, that's a gimme. I knew if this video evidence about
No,
handing out the
I'm just
donuts,
saying what the defense attorney will say.
yeah, and it would be I could knock it out of the park in about 5 seconds, and the jury would be laughing. I would have all 12 jurors rolling their eyes at a defense attorney who would say he was just handing out donuts and coffee. Okay, no, he was encouraging, providing material assistance to people who were about to commit a crime, and he basically knew what they were doing. And did he ever criticize what they did? Did he say, oh, they were so bad, I was covering, or did he say, I was just there neutrally to cover I knew what they were about to do? One could say, now you don't have an affirmative duty to call the police knowing what they're about to do. And even when he entered the church, if he was truly innocent and just happened to be at the church accidentally, he doesn't have an affirmative duty to call the police, although that would be the moral thing to do. Stop, there's this raving mob that is victimizing people, and there's a child crying here. No, he thought positively of the whole thing, as his statements make clear. He's speaking about it in terms of we. He's encouraging them, and he's providing material assistance. That's what we call in the law aiding and abetting. So Don Lemon has no special rights as a journalist. He was committing the crime and going there and joining the crowd. See, if you're not going in there for the lawful business, but you're entering with this crowd doing that, now I think it's up to now 22 people who are being charged up, at least investigated, and several people, and they should be. Now, what is the correct punishment? No, it shouldn't be.
Oh, okay, let's not go there because
Okay.
I wanna keep that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add. So we have a video from the scene itself where he kind of. Maybe we should just play it. It's not a long video. So just oh, maybe I don't have
Can I
it.
just say one thing?
Sure.
I find it truly remarkable that people that I like and respect and who share my philosophical principles are bending over backwards to defend Don Lemon, who apparently approved of this terrible crime that had victims. Now, it's not so terrible that I would put anybody in prison for it, but it's clearly a crime. It's clearly not free speech. They are not engaged in a valid legal protest. This whole crowd was violating people's rights. And if we understand rights as a unity, we understand that your freedom of speech cannot involve harming someone else, endangering other people, violating their rights. You do not understand rights if rights are ever in conflict like that. And if we have a legal system, let me just back up and say something else. If we have a legal system such as we do today, which is corrupt and does pit one person's rights against another person's rights, if I have to put a hierarchy of rights to it, freedom of speech would be at the top. But that demands that we understand what freedom of speech is. You know, Ayn Rand opposed the draft. It's a form of slavery. Ayn Rand opposed the Vietnam War. She thought it was an altruistic slaughter of young Americans. And yet the Columbia protesters in 1968, who were breaking windows, impeding traffic, those Columbia University protesters in 1968, she called them hoodlums. And they said they were acting like street fascists from the 1930s. She could make a distinction here between agreeing or disagreeing with the law or the policy and still calling out the violation of other people's rights. Those protesters at Columbia were little fascist, proto-fascist hoodlums, and she called them out for what they were. This crowd, whatever their opinion, and whether you agree with it or not, storming the church, interfering with what's going on there, making children cry, injuring people there, was a crime, a violation of their rights. And whatever your thought about the government, now think about this, the people in the church, do we know what their opinions on immigration were? I do not know. Just because the past, you think they all agree with the past? I don't know. What you're doing, though, is victimizing innocent people.
And it doesn't matter, right? Like
it does not matter.
Like
cannot
even
matter.
Like the pastor could have like killed somebody, and they could have believed that he killed somebody. That's for the government to like deal with, not for like a bunch of mob to go in and take him out.
That's why we don't do street justice. You know, Ayn Rand was very cautious about the way her material was promoted. In the 1960s, on one of her books, it's a wonderful statement that had to have her stamp of approval. Ayn Rand knows that the real battle is fought in men's minds, not on the street. Engaging in a stunt like this, let me suggest, is if you do oppose what ICE is doing, engaging in a stunt like this will be counterproductive. It will cause rational, good people to get turned off by your side. We will not win arguments by stunts in the street or by violating other people's rights and creating victims. We fight bad ideas with better ideas. We fight it with words, written or spoken. And if you want to have a protest, a peaceful protest, and do it the correct way, and do a peaceful, non-rights violating protest, that might help. If you want to have a test case against the law itself, get arrested on purpose. Now, it's rather the point to get arrested to make your point if you're violating the law. What you cannot do morally, and what I think is obvious, should be obvious to anyone who believes in objectivism, is your rights cannot involve violating someone else's rights. Your free speech does not include the ability to storm into a church and scream your opinion at people who are there to pray and hear a sermon. That is bizarre, and you're hurting people. It's cruel. It's wrong. Why? Because you're violating their rights. Your objection, however sincerely you believe your position, does not give you the right to violate other people's rights. Don Lemon clearly approved of what these people were doing. We have it on tape. We have him saying we before, and then afterwards approving, in effect, of such demonstrations. That will prove his intent quite clearly, right? And if he entered with that intent, he's just as guilty as all the rest of them, because journalists don't have any special right over and above anyone else.
I would only add here, even when it comes to, making some political change, you hear a lot of abolish ICE. And I understand the sentiment of a lot of people that go to the streets. But what is actually happening when it comes to Democrats? They had a chance to shut down the government over ICE funding, right? They didn't. They have a chance to like actually put in some bill to abolish or change ICE. They are not doing that. So, I am for, I don't know if straight up abolishment, because you still have to enforce the current law as it is, but doing some change or, limiting Trump somehow, Democrats have a chance to do so. They're not doing it. So they are screwing over their own people
Well, there can obviously be an honest, sincere disagreement about what immigration policy should be. If we treat people, in terms of the whole issue, I mean, you could even object to the way ICE is doing what they're doing and what ICE is doing on the streets and still have a sincere difference of opinion about the issue of immigration law. We can't conflate the two. We can't call evil everyone who disagrees with us on a subject. And if objectivism is what's involved, there is no objectivist position on what immigration law should or should not be. There is no objectivist position on this. Do not confuse someone who's, some intellectual who promotes objectivism, their application with objectivism itself. In fact, we need very importantly to distinguish that so that, we recognize that people who use objectivism to justify their various opinions, their application is their application. It's not objectivism. So calling people evil, unfriending people because they disagree with you about what immigration policy should be, I would say that contradicts the principles of objectivism. Yes, I can disagree. There are certain ideas that are so obviously wrong that you could say they're misusing their mind and evading. But unless I know your personal context well, I'm not going to call you evil for disagreeing with me about what immigration policy should be, let's say. But if I see some horrible act that ICE is doing and I agree, okay, that's horrible. And if people can't honestly see it, then in an individual case, I can say, okay, you're evading about what happened here in this incident. All of these distinctions need to be made. Someone, said to me, again, someone who uses objectivism to, says they're applying objectivism, says to me, take a side, Jim. That right there is a contradiction with objectivism. Ayn Rand, for example, as I say, with the Columbia protesters, could be against the very things that these protesters were protesting, the draft, the Vietnam War, and still say, oh, that doesn't give you the right to violate other people's rights. In fact, you're normalizing political violence.
Yeah, pick a side, James. I should only say something that I told James.
Objectivism tells me I can't be that simple-minded. Objectivism tells me I have to make the sort of distinctions that Ayn Rand routinely made. That's objectivism.
Yeah, pick a side can be said, during the American Civil War or the Revolutionary War, not during
Right. Right.
not now.
I absolutely believe that the rebellions against slavery before the Civil War were in the right, and I would have joined them. I would have joined them.
We have a member chat from Robert, who has been a member for 45 months. Thank you so much. He said, sorry, I thought it was obvious that my earlier comment was intended to be humorous and satirical. So sorry for that. I didn't catch that.
My bad. Sarcasm doesn't come across in words sometimes, but it's my fault for jumping to that conclusion then. But Robert, I've seen the equivalent. I have actually on social media in recent days argued with people who were trying to justify the entire storming of the church. And they were using, in their own minds, objectivism in order to do so. That is, I think, disturbing. But I think for anyone, including people who use objectivism in their lives, anyone, especially those people, should be able to make these distinctions. You don't take it out on these parishioners, whatever their opinion on immigration may be, whatever their opinion on ICE may be. There was a video going around of these people who stormed into this, I think it was a coffee shop or something. Oh, no, it was a yoga place. And they had a, ICE out or stop ICE sign on, but they'd taken it down. So these protesters come in and demand of the yoga place that they put the sign back up, screaming, you know what ICE is doing? No one's illegal. They're kidnapping people, and they don't care about any of these distinctions. They demand that the yoga facility replace the sign and take their sides. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example of absurdity, and they're becoming the private thought police, in effect, and they're the ones clearly in the wrong. There can be little doubt about that. But if people storm into churches, it's in effect the equivalent. How dare you even listen to a pastor who might be supportive of ICE or be working with ICE? Well, you're just making more victims. Okay, that is wrong. no one's rights come at the expense of other people's rights. And that's part of the principle that we need to make when we make those distinctions. And those distinctions are vital. Otherwise, we can't even have a sane debate on the topic. Now, I understand that on Tuesday, for members only, we're going to have a further discussion of immigration and what ICE is doing. And frankly, much of what ICE is doing I find reprehensible, but I think the issue more generally about immigration is a very complex one. And I think we should get into that at some point. And Razi agrees with me. So on Tuesday, for members only, we will have a question and answer period. So if you're a member of Ayn Rand Center UK, please join us on Tuesday. I believe it'll be at noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. So calculate the hour differences if you live somewhere else on the planet. But we'll get into the immigration policy in general and what ICE is doing in particular, and particularly the two very famous cases where ICE protesters have been shot dead. So it's getting very, very deadly and deadly serious, obviously, in my view. So I don't want to turn today into a broader discussion of that, but I hope that good people, can see that the storming of the church was clearly a criminal violation of other people's rights and ought to be prosecuted. And that Don Lemon is no exception because he's a journalist. If he stormed into that church to be part of just a crowd that wasn't there to do the lawful business that goes on in a church, he's just as guilty as everyone else just in storming the place, much less in encouraging it, providing it material support in any way.
Yeah, so that's going to be a Q&A with James Valiant on Tuesday. Link to that is in the chat. It's already scheduled, so people can already ring the bell so they can see when it comes. And you can become the YouTube member for just $4.99 US dollars, and I think also £4.99, and whatever that is in your local currency, as well as website members who have a ton of other benefits will be also able to participate. Now let's move on to sort of I guess the reactions generally we've seen, and maybe we can just cover quickly, because as soon as this happened, Democrats and people on the left turned Don Lemon into a free speech hero. I think there was even a quote from Nancy Pelosi. I don't know if you have it, something like you can become the face of First Amendment or something like that. So again, we have
that is a fundamental misunderstanding of freedom of the press and freedom of speech.
Yeah, not to mention, what about the First Amendment?
What Nancy Pelosi is doing is she's joining in the general left-wing attitude that violating other people's rights can be part of free speech. She does not understand that rights form a unity. She is in effect doing the sympathetic thing that people were doing with those Columbia hoodlums, as Ayn Rand called them, back in the 60s. It doesn't matter what you're protesting. There is no, let me put it this way, speech is speech. Physical force is physical force. When you physically violate someone else's rights, that cannot be free speech. You have exited the realm of freedom of speech when you're using physical force against other people. That no one can interpret it that way. But that's what the left is all about, and they've been about that for decades. Yes, you can block bridges, you can block traffic, you can take over Hamilton Hall. If you're pro-Hamas, you can threaten and block Jewish students at UCLA. You can, no, that is not freedom of speech. And if it is included in the concept of protest, then we have to distinguish very much between non-violent, non-rights violating protests from protests that involve violating other people's rights. That is, and if we're going to avoid violence on the streets, which I think is really important, I see it, I don't approve of either side in this, okay? But it looks like both sides are hell-bent on taking this to the streets with violence. If we're going to have a civil war in this country, what chance does that give anyone who supports objectivism? Because it'll be a choice of a violent, unpredictable, chaotic outcome between two different flavors of fascism, in effect. And what kind of chance do we have in a violent civil war today? I ask you that, my friends. Oh, it's
Yeah.
the sentencing. There was one other point you made about what
Oh
the
yeah, I want
sentencing.
to go
Yeah,
into it. So let's do this. Um, Sorry, I should say. So it's Don Lemon said that Nancy Pelosi said that he would be the face of the First Amendment. Just so I don't put words into. It's reportedly Don Lemon says that. Then separately, because you mentioned violence in America, if anything, an alternative history, but a civil war happens in America, taught me anything. People should move to Hawaii. Every single alternative scenario I've seen, it's always in the continental USA there's the Civil War, and then Hawaii is okay. So if you want to stay in America while avoiding that, here is your plan.
find a mountain cabin somewhere and hide out. Yeah. Find a Gulch Gulch somewhere to hide out while the fascists fight it out on the streets. That would
But
be the selfish, egoistic thing, by the way, to do. Don't get yourself involved in these incidents on the streets just for egoistic purposes, knowing what the effective way of fighting unjust laws is and not contributing to these street thug wannabe fascists and their approach to settling disputes among human beings. You head down that slippery slope towards street violence, believe me, objectivism doesn't stand a chance in today's culture.
somebody says Puerto Rico is nice too. Is Puerto Rico able to survive on its own without like being part of America?
What
That
do
would
you
be
mean
my biggest problem.
survive?
Although even Hawaii is, I guess, problematic.
Yeah.
But it's beside. But yeah, Puerto Rico
I'm
is
so
nice.
sorry about the barking dog if you hear it.
No, but it's a bit silent. So, well, first we'll go to sentencing in a bit. We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, accepting James is right, and anti-ICE pro-protesters are wrong. It still raises the question, why do so many, including objectivists, get this issue wrong? That would be a great conversation to have. I mean, there will be part of the Q&As, or
Yeah,
we could bring that up. So make sure to, again, Tuesday Q&A with James Valiant.
I'm sure we
And there's
both
going to
have.
be
Yeah,
one more right the week after, so it might be even better then. So there's going to be two upcoming Tuesdays. There's going to be a Q&A. So make sure to become a member so you can actually see both of those. But yeah, let's get to the sentencing. And first, since we covered the left reaction, let's of course cover the right reaction, which is of course calling for Don Lemon to basically get a chair for this. With the one instance was Trump reposted a message on his account. The message said, a small group of elderly ladies were protesting at an abortion clinic and were given 40 years in prison for violating the FACE Act. I would like to see the same kind of sentence of Don Lemon and the people that broke into the church and did that during services. So I tried to find specifically this case about the ladies. I wasn't. I don't know if James, I think the most people can get under FACE Act is 10 years, and that includes like it has to be like big groups that all like basically premeditated and like made sure this
violent.
happened.
Violent. Now, if you have
And
a felony record, I mean, there's several things that
oh yeah,
factor
and that.
into a sentence. One of the things that factors into your criminal sentence, if and when you are criminally convicted, is your prior record for crimes. And that's relevant and will vary from person to person. The two other things that are important are the proportionality in terms of the harm you caused and the sentence you get, and previous instances of similar convictions of the same category. Does that make sense? But because we don't have a long track record with the FACE Act on criminal prosecutions against places of worship, it'll be kind of a new thing for the judge to decide in that respect. But just walking in the door in terms of proportionate harm, I don't think he should even go to prison for it. Should he be placed on criminal probation? Should he be compelled to pay a fine? Should he be compelled to pay some kind of restitution to the victims in that church? Maybe community service with respect to churches he doesn't approve of. In fact, I'd pick, if I was the judge, I'd pick the kind of churches that Don Lemon finds particularly distasteful and make him do gardening there or help them pick up the trash there. Now, that would be appropriate. You see, that would be proportionate to the kind of harm he caused. If there were injuries, and there's been allegations that people inside the church were physically injured, then it would reach, in my mind, the level where some jail time, some custody time would be appropriate. Maybe not even a year in prison, but maybe some local jail time. Does that make sense? The punishment must fit the crime, must be proportionate to the harm he caused, and comparatively proportionate to the kind of punishments that people who violate this law get. And the other factor, as I say, is your own criminal history. If you have a record for violence, if you have a record for obstructing justice or causing a public disturbance, all that will be definitely taken. And if you're on probation or parole for some other crime, obviously you violated the conditions of the probation or parole that said, I won't commit another crime. So all of that would have to be taken into account on a case-by-case basis. The FACE Act, yeah, I mean, Trump is correct in citing abortion clinic cases because it's the same law, but I would have to look at the nature of the act, that the actual deed that the person who was convicted under the law did in order to make that comparison. And I don't know about this case that you just spoke about. And of course,
I tried
no,
looking for it. I cannot imagine, like, you'd ha like there would have to be another charge. I cannot see you just like you would have to have like one or two felonies on top of like the FACE Act violation charge to like be able to get like 40 years.
I would
Especially
think
if
40
it is like,
years? There are
especially because,
murderers who spend less time in
yeah,
prison than 40
especially
years. That's
because it
absurd
says
on the face of it.
because it says elderly ladies. Like, do you even like when somebody becomes like very old at some point, you don't even like you just don't you just get a life sentence at that point? Do you get like
Well,
specific?
a life sentence would be bizarrely disproportionate on the
No,
face
I
of
mean
it.
if you're like 70, it doesn't matter if you get like 20 or 30 years.
That
That's what
is
I'm
the
like looking
equivalent
for.
of a life sentence, depending
Yeah,
on
yeah,
your age.
that's what I was thinking.
And judges do take that into account as well. I mean, you won't get out until you're in your 80s or 90s. Okay, when you're probably not going to be committing any crimes like this again. Okay, yeah, that should be taken into account. But it should take into account your criminal history, and it should take into account the harm that was caused. Children were crying, people were upset, people were disrupted from what they were doing. That means that there should be some kind of punishment. But let me suggest that unless people were injured, and there is an allegation that multiple people were injured, um, unless people were injured, it doesn't seem to me to rise to the level of a custody case, as we say. But it should be a criminal case, be on your record, restitution, fine, probation, maybe community service to help the church, the very church you victimized that you don't like, Mr. Lemon, because he went out of his way to say that's not the kind of Christianity I like anyway. Um, really? Well, then you should learn that they have the same right you do to have whatever religion or no religion that you do, Mr. Lemon. And a nice, eloquent way of making that point would be to compel him as a condition of his probation to do community service at a place of where, see, I'm an atheist. To me, anyone going to church is nothing I approve of. But Mr. Lemon, you have no right to pick and choose what pastors and churches and what church meetings you disapprove of to go violate their rights at. So no, that would seem to me to be the appropriate kind of sentence in this case.
Yeah, and I would only mention because, like I said, we both have, on the left, people say Don Lemon is a free speech hero, and on the right, people saying that, like straight up, he should get chair.
Both seem to me to be madness.
And I would compare it. I recommend people. I mentioned it to James. People checking out A Time to Kill, a movie from like the 90s that takes place in the post-segregation Minnesota. So not Minnesota, Mississippi, in the deep South. So that's a big difference. And in the movie itself, a black person, African American, commits a crime, murders two people, and the sort of social you have the trial itself, but sort of the social pressures coming in is basically from sort of, you could say, the left, which is represented by the NAACP, who say, okay, this guy is clearly not guilty because he's black, so he cannot like commit any crimes. And then you had the KKK, who was like, okay, this guy is clearly guilty because he's black.
And let me
And
tell
this
you,
is
as a
how this kind
prosecutor,
of feels like. That
there have been
basically, yeah.
cases, there have been cases like that scenario in reality multiple times. The father of a child molest victim thinks the guy's not, he gets off on a technicality, or he thinks he's not getting properly punished, even if he is being charged, will kill, do his own vigilante justice and kill. Now, I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, that I realize the difficulty of even getting a conviction in that case, because the jury is going to say he's the father of a child who was killed or raped. And so that's going to cut really hard on the jury's feelings. Frankly, this is would be a much easier case as a prosecutor who did murder cases and the much more modest cases, especially when I began. I can tell you it would be a whole lot easier, I think, to get a jury to agree with me, so long as I could filter out the crazies who think this is free speech, and I would be able to filter out from the jury the crazies who think this is free speech. It would be much easier to get a prosecution of these people who stormed the church, including Don Lemon, by the way, than it would be, say, to convict the father of a child molest victim or a child murder victim, where everyone's going to think, okay, putting myself into his context, you can almost understand why he committed the crime. Give him a medal rather than convict him of a crime. There's going to be that attitude across political viewpoints, if that makes sense. A much
Yeah,
harder case, frankly, in that kind of context.
yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I was comparing is basically the automatic, we've decided the guilt of innocence of Don Lemon, basically, 10 years ago or decades ago when he became journalist, right? People on the right automatically say he's guilty. People on the left automatically say he's innocent. Um,
It shouldn't matter what our politics are. We do not engage in vigilante justice. Part of what, being not an anarchist, part of respecting our government is to realize that you hurt me, and so 5 years later I go take it out on you, kind of revenge. No, 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 no. That kind of thing has to be done in court. That's why we have courts to decide these things. We don't decide our disputes on the streets. We decide disputes in court. If you still believe in the system, if we reach a point where a Civil War, American Revolution 2.0 makes sense, and I can easily imagine a point where that absolutely makes sense, where government becomes so violative of our rights and we don't have any peaceful means of changing it, like free speech. So long as that's what Ayn Rand gave priority to. She defined what a dictatorship was, right? One party rule, breakdown of due process, censorship. But the thing about censorship, as she emphasized, was that it provides us a means of peacefully changing the laws. So long as we're not in a situation that justifies a Revolution 2.0 or a civil war on the streets, then we do not use violence ourselves. It is not justifiable to violate someone else's rights. And unless you're hell bent on either making a test case for court, in which case, as I say, the whole point is to get arrested to make a test case in the courts. That's rather the point of a test case. Or you do not settle the dispute on the street, we settle it in court. And let's wait for the trial here to happen. I mean, there have been arrests, there have been investigations.
Yeah, and isn't the first hearing? I thought you were actually going to bring that up because I think the first hearing when it comes to Don Lemon case is in 2 days. If I don't, I think it's on the 9th.
There's going to be a hearing. Do I trust our judges these days? Too frequently, judges themselves are cutting a path through existing law, making a hash out of existing law to make a political point. And I'm wary about judges, but at least I have to tell myself we have to let this play out in the courts, because if something wrong happens at the trial court level before conviction, the prosecutor can appeal. If something even happens even after a conviction happens, the defense even can still appeal. So, and we can get higher courts looking at it. But let's let the courts decide. The courts are there to decide disputes between people. That's one of the valid functions of government. So let's wait for all the evidence to come out in court before we come to final decisions. But if these videos are correct, and if what I hear from Don Lemon's own podcast mouth are correct, it does appear that this was a terrible crime. Don Lemon participated in the crime. He wasn't there, simply to cover it. It wouldn't matter if he was part of the disruptive crowd anyway. And he does appear to have supported it, given it encouragement and some material support, which would make him a participant in this crime. I mean, how did he even know to be there at that time and place? So, as a former prosecutor, I can say that this, proof-wise, setting aside the political intensity of our moment here in America, setting aside that political intensity, this is on the face of it. If this video evidence turns out to be true, this is a no-brainer conviction of Don Lemon. And using objectivist principles, people should understand that unless they're ready for civil war or American Revolution 2.0, this has to be a crime and considered a crime by the standards I just articulated.
Yeah, like the main I don't know issue that I would bring up is like I don't know why we even need like FACE Act specifically to be brought upon this. Like this was clear, like we said, trespassing, violent misconduct. Like
you could say the same about abortion clinics. There should be plenty of trespass laws and disturbing the peace laws, interference laws on the state level. And frankly, federal government getting involved in whatever your politics are, the federal government having a role in local law enforcement is a constitutionally dubious thing in my mind, at least most of it. So you ask whether the FACE law, but at least let me put it this way, at least from a moral perspective, this was a violation of people's rights. This was a violation of a number of their rights, and I could argue their freedom of religion as well. So when it's a violation of people's rights in general, does the government have a right to do this? And if the federal government doesn't think there will be a response, much less an adequate response from the state and local governments, then of course you can understand morally, if not constitutionally, and I think those are two very separate things. Our Constitution is not perfect, nor do the way the courts interpret it in very imperfect ways over the last century, in my view. But if you ask me morally, should the government do something about this horrible violation of people's rights? Yeah. Now I say horrible. Should it be a proportionate response? Of course. You don't put them away for years in prison either. So bear all that context in mind, people. And, understand that there can be valid differences of opinion between honest people of good faith. And if you want to discuss immigration policy in general, if you want to discuss what's going on, the terrible things that have been going on over the last year, over the whole last year, much less the shootings that happened in Minneapolis, join us on Tuesday for a question and answer period. I'm happy to answer all those questions, and we'll have more time to get into the details of all of this. But please join us then if you have more questions.
We have Bonnie, who's a member in the chat, and I'm trying to find her message that I wanted to read out. She said, didn't they vet the jury for pro-Palestinian bias in the trials that just let the vandals go in the UK? It seems that they must not have. So the UK, as far as I understand, doesn't have the sort of jury picking process that America has. I think technically there is like a little bit, but it's very rare and very uncommon to be in the sort of like James said, sort of like a grilling to get, maybe more jurors that would be more likely to get the conviction you would prefer. Although both sides do it.
In the United States, if a potential juror says, I absolutely disagree with this law and I think this law is immoral, boom, that's for cause. Let me give you a very...
No, but don't in America you straight up have that you get like a pool of jurors, and then both the defense and prosecution can
Have
like remove them. And
automatic bumps for no reason. Now, they can't use those bumps in a racist way, for example. On the other hand, you have automatic bumps for no cause, just because and depending on the kind of case it is. In a death penalty case, you get more automatic exclusions, but then there's also an unlimited number of for cause.
Mhm.
If you can see prejudice on the part of a potential juror and you can explain it to the judge, this will be a prejudiced juror. There's an unlimited number. Both sides have an unlimited number. So, say on a death penalty, now this is clear law in America. If you have a death penalty case and the person says, "I'm morally opposed to the death penalty," that is a for cause removal right there. Now, uh, I think reasonable minds can disagree. When it comes to really serious murder cases, I think reasonable minds can disagree about the death penalty. But the existing law in the United States is if you have a moral opposition to the death penalty, that is a for cause, and there's an unlimited number of for cause, excuse you from the juries, bump you off the jury. But in general, if they show bias against the law, again, it has to be a pretty clear, I just morally oppose this law and I would never dot 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 dot. Or people like that, and whatever that like that is happens to be the defendant. That's a for cause bump, you see. Or I have it out for law enforcement. I don't like cops. I never trust cops. No cop, police officer will ever be believed in my mind. And I know I've got cop witnesses. That's for cause. And then you get on top of an unlimited number of for cause jury bumps, you get a certain number of, depending on the jurisdiction and the nature of the crime. If it's, for example, death penalty, you get more what they call peremptory, to use the technical legal phrase, peremptory challenges where you don't have to state your reason. Now, the other side, I say, under certain circumstances, can object to a peremptory challenge if they find that one side or the other is doing it in a racially bigoted way. Does that make sense?
yep.
Okay.
Uh, we have a super chat from Skinny Money. Thank you so much. He says, "I'm a simple man. I see James and I press donate." Well, thank you so much. We should get
Thank
James
you.
more often. Um, Bonnie is asking, can we submit questions ahead? So we didn't discuss this, but I'm sure we can make that happen. Most likely we'll do a YouTube post and people can send questions there for YouTube members.
Please.
So
Yeah,
follow that, and we'll most likely send out an email for website members. So watch out for your inbox and watch out for YouTube posts if you are a member on YouTube, and we'll most likely do something like that.
absolutely. Please do. And that might give me a chance to prepare, knowing what the kind of questions are. So I would actually encourage that, Daniel, from our audience and from people in general. But believe me, even if it's right there in the moment, I'll do my best to answer questions because I think there are complexities here that are often overlooked. Looking at the social media debates from the right and the left, as you point out, and even with people who say they use objectivism to decide these things, there are some really intense debates where I think both sides are missing the subtleties and complexities of cases like this.
So with that, make sure to again, the video is up if people wanna or is pre-scheduled if people wanna check it out. James, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
No, here is where you can find me. I do tomorrow, for example, we're going to be doing another installment of our analysis of Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, Leonard Peikoff's magnificent treatise on the philosophy of Ayn Rand, but it's only for paid members. So I would really consider becoming a paid member so you can participate in those and ask me questions this coming Tuesday and the following Tuesday.
So make sure to join us for that. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Damn Dan. Links are gonna be in the description. And with that, thank you guys for watching. Thank you, James, for joining me. And we'll see everybody tomorrow with both James's study group and of course the daily objective. Until then, bye bye.
Be safe.